That's like one of my pet peeves is the idea that like organizing and what happens in DC are different, because they're not actually. Smart advocacy work in DC is just organizing. It's organizing with a different set of people. Rather than activists on the street, you're organizing with members of Congress, but it's like still just organizing.
Hello, I'm Guido Girgenti.
And I'm Amira Hassan.
And you're listening to Bloc Party, a show about the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party. Today, we jump into a group chat to discuss President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package. What does the bill tell us about the direction of the Democratic Party in the Biden era? About deficit politics in DC right now? About the lessons Democrats have learned from the Obama era? We'll get to that, and then in the second half, we'll break down how progressive Democrats in the House secured some wins during the factional negotiations that heated up as this bill was being finalized. Progressives did not always have a big enough block to win all their demands. But first, in the DMs today, someone new is in the chat. A friend of Amira's. She's been organizing in the trenches of Capitol Hill for the past few months, and now she's joining us to debrief. Mary Small, the National Legislative Director of Indivisible, a grassroots movement with thousands of chapters around the country. Mary, welcome to Bloc Party. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Mary, you live and work in D.C.?
Yeah, that's right. I live and work here.
Are you like Amira? Were you at the top levels of Senate leadership? You won't talk about your former life, but you decided to stay in DC and keep fighting the good fight.
No, unlike Amira, I have not worked in either the Senate or the House. I actually came to DC to do advocacy and organizing around the intersection of immigration and the criminal legal system. And have gone from there to end up working on a whole host of other issues. But I will say, working on legislative strategy related to criminalization will really teach you the ins and outs of how you've got to execute a smart play.
Mary's saying very politely, I just want to be clear, I did not go work on Capitol Hill, but I did see the worst parts of Capitol Hill. Working on criminal justice reform. Mary, it's great to have you here, and she's back. You just heard her. Justice Democrats political director Amira Hassan. Amira, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fabulous. It's 70 degrees in DC. It's wild. And I got the shot. So I'm really just, accelerating at life right now.
What? Are
Amira?
you serious?
Yes, I got the shot yesterday. So,
Congrats.
Life is looking up a little bit.
My heart is fluttering. I'm happy. I'm going to tear up.
And Mary's here. And, I usually try to get out of talking about my daytime job. But today, I'm ready to talk about it. And I was like, we'll do some behind the scenes. I won't even mention Meghan Markle, the crown. I won't even try.
Look at that. Amira is so excited to debrief these factional negotiations with Mary that we're just going to skip the Meghan Markle news cycle on this group chat. So let's dive in. Biden's American Rescue Plan was signed into law on Thursday, March 12th, and it has a lot of stuff in it.
I signed into law the American Rescue Plan that delivers immediate relief to millions of people. Includes $1,400 in direct rescue checks, payments. It extends unemployment benefits. It helps small businesses. It lowers health care premiums for many. It provides food and nutrition, keeps families in their homes. And it will cut child poverty in this country in half, according to the experts.
It's got a lot of money in it. Has a historically large price tag, $1.9 trillion, more than twice the size of the Obama stimulus in 2009. There really is a lot in it. Helpful to start just appreciating the scope and the scale of it. It includes $1,400 survival checks to every American, $130 billion to fund public schools as they try to get reopened and resume in-person learning this spring. For Americans at risk of eviction, $27 billion going to emergency rental assistance, and of course, the hugely expanded child tax credit. The benefit parents will get per child is going to increase from $2,000 to $3,000. Actually, $3,600 if your kid is 5 years or younger. And the tax benefit no longer excludes the poorest mothers as it has these past 2 decades. And there's more.
Yeah, and to add to the child tax credit and the fact that they're not going to be end of year tax credit that you have to wait for, it's supposed to be regular installment. That's really, really exciting and important.
Right, getting the benefit every month. What else?
State and local funding, honestly, this was supposed to be done a long, long time ago, but obviously we didn't have the levers of powers. $31 billion for Native communities is really, really exciting too.
Yeah, the continuation of expanded unemployment benefits is huge. We know that unemployment continues to be sky high across the country, and so continuing to support folks until we really come out on the other side of this pandemic is critical. And was actually, I know we're going to talk about this later, but was actually one of the last negotiated pieces in the package as it was moving through the Senate. What we ultimately landed with was $300 additional per week that runs through the beginning of September. That was originally $400 a week, so it came down a little bit over the course of negotiations. But the thing that was added in is that the first just over $10,000 of unemployment insurance support that folks get is tax-free.
That was a fight to win.
It was a huge fight. The drag out of the negotiation in the Senate, the final stretch, making it, I think, the second longest vote ever in Senate history, really came down to this negotiation about these 3 pieces of the unemployment package, like how long it was going to last for, how much it was going to be per week, and what portions of it would be tax-free. And so where we finally landed is like a huge tax break for unemployed folks. $300 a week through the beginning of September, a little bit less in terms of length of time and amount of money than what was in the House package. The fact that we landed where we did with this huge tax break plus continued unemployment insurance into the fall is really the result of progressives in the House creating this really firm backstop of how much this could be changed Senate side.
We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the tactics and strategies. But just to keep processing this bill that has just passed, the size of it alone, $1.9 trillion, I think, for folks who work in D.C. is a big number. And I want to just start with this question as we try to understand what this bill means, what it's telling us about the state of American politics. Amira, how much worse could this have been? If you think back to different moments over the past few months, you know that there's a COVID relief bill that's going to be the first order of business for a Biden administration. You're thinking about how Biden's going to govern. You're thinking about how Democrats are going to approach this. What were reasonable expectations for how much worse, how much more cut down this bill could have gotten before it actually was going to pass the Senate with all 50 Democratic votes?
Well, I think that is nobody knew what track they were going to take, right? But if they tried to do the bipartisan thing, which there was a gang of 8, not 10, there weren't even really 10 Republicans in on this, but there was a bipartisan working group that was trying to put together their version of a COVID relief package. And
this included Manchin and moderate GOP senators.
Correct, yes.
Quote unquote moderate.
Quote-unquote moderates, all working together, putting their brains together to see what they could come up with. And I'm pretty sure it was somewhere around the $800 billion mark, basically halved. And within that, it was definitely excluding a lot of priorities that we were fighting for. So in that universe, about half of what we have now would have been in play. And from there, that's the starting point. So that being the starting point, it would reasonably be a lot less.
I think that's totally right, that the scope of the package could have been dramatically smaller than what we saw. We've seen the way that the conversation about austerity and needing to be overly concerned with government spending rather than taking an approach towards investment in communities and the government's role being to invest in their people, taking this cost-cutting, penny-pinching approach that would have said falsely said we can't afford to do this. So you're totally right about the scope of the package. But the other piece of it is we very nearly hurdled towards this trade-off where the package was a mixed bag of things that were genuinely helpful in providing relief to people and things that were bailouts for corporations, and further entrenched like the concentration of power inside of corporate America. Because that's what we saw in some of the packages that passed last year, right? This like mixed bag of stuff that was actually for people and for corporations and for billionaires and for the mega wealthy.
And you felt like even after the election, you were worried that that kind of bill was still on the table for COVID relief round one.
Absolutely. If we were looking at a 60-vote threshold in the Senate where we had to find 10 Republicans in order to get it across the finish line, like if Democrats collectively had chosen to constrain themselves and go for the 60-vote threshold, absolutely we would have had a scaled-down package, but we also would have had policy compromises where we had a mixed bag for what was actually in it. The moment that they chose to work on a 50-vote threshold instead and pass this along partisan lines, which was absolutely 100% the right call, they opened up the possibility for both like a big in scale or scope bill, as well as a chance to actually only have good things in there, right? And like, I don't want to have rose-colored glasses. Like that was still a fight to make sure that the policies stayed strong. But that opportunity opened up at all when they acknowledged that these like unicorn Republicans were not going to appear to help them get this across the finish line.
Because in that alternate universe, Joe Biden is showing up and he's like, I'm a bipartisan guy. We need a bipartisan bill. I'm going to start talking to 10 GOP senators, and then they just start demanding bailouts for different corporate sectors, and you just feel like you're on defense against that the whole time.
Yes.
You know, I think some people on the left have been unsure about whether to overstate or understate the bill's significance, and I feel like it's such a big bill that maybe it's hard to make meaning of the whole thing at once, but judging different parts of the bill on one metric at a time, I think can build up a fuller picture. And two pieces that I hear you pointing to that sound really interconnected is one, it seems to signal a real shift on Democrats' legislative strategy, which we should not take lightly. This is not what happened in 2009, right? Amira, we're not worried. We're not as worried anymore about delays for months in seeking bipartisanship.
I mean, I'm always worried. I think we should stay worried.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Stay vigilant.
This, I think they didn't do it this time, and yes, they're signaling that they will continue pursuing this strategy in the next reconciliation package, hopefully. But then you'll also have news days where you'll have President Biden, Joe Manchin be like, the next bill, the next thing we're doing has to be bipartisan.
Right.
This was a special exemption, but the next thing that we're going to do is going to be different. So
yeah,
stay
totally.
worried.
The like wielding their power thing is a baby muscle for the Democrats. So like good on them for doing it, but it is a baby muscle. And so like we got to be really sharp about, I don't know what the metaphor is here, like continuing to force protein shakes on them or something to like work that
get 'em in the
muscle
gym.
so that we can continue to see it over the course of this legislative session.
Mary's just like yelling at Joe Biden in the gym. It's like, you can do it. You have 50 votes in the Senate. I gotta keep going. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to Rob Portman. Don't listen. But Mary, just going back to what you said before, is that once you choose to do that at the gym, once you choose to say, we are open to the possibility of passing this on a party line vote, a majority of Americans support this, we're not gonna be backed down from like our unity frame. This is a unity bill. And that is what leads to the possibility of not compromising with a politics of austerity or fearing the deficit that there was definitely an opportunity to do. Larry Summers, the Treasury Secretary under Clinton, the National Economic Council Director under Obama, the guy we've talked about on this show who says in 2008, nothing bigger than a trillion can pass, nothing with a T can pass. He goes back on NPR, doing his thing again, saying, I'm worried this stimulus might be too big. This is Larry Summers on NPR on February 8th, about a month before we are talking.
The question is how much. If your bathtub isn't full, you should turn the faucet on, but that doesn't mean you should turn it on as hard as you can and as long as you can. And so the question isn't whether we need big stimulus. The question is we need the biggest stimulus in American history, and is whether we're using any of it to build a stronger economy or just to give money to people.
And they didn't listen to Larry Summers this time.
My sense is that this is one of like the key lessons that Democrats learned from the very beginning of the Obama administration, which is that the risks of going too small, of having a recession that lingered on, where people didn't actually feel like their government jumped in to help and support them, like the risks of all of that were so much bigger than the potential scenario that Larry Summers was talking about. And the truth is they're not done. They today are going to move this into law, but we're all going to be pushing for them to immediately pivot to the recovery phase, right? Like they're not done yet, but I do think that they've learned this lesson from a decade ago about the dangers of going too small, and are at least trying to kind of learn from that lesson and lean in the other direction.
Yeah, they're trying, and I think that they did it with this one, but I think, you start to see in more articles and in more voices this, like, okay, this was a lot. We need to chill out. We need to pause before we do more and really see how it plays out. And this is where why we can't ever let off pressure.
But I think that goes to the point that you were raising earlier about like actually talking about the good stuff in this bill. Because I know we're going to also talk about some stuff that got stripped out and some things that we didn't win that we wanted. Like we should talk about all of that too. But the reality is that if we're trying to create the political conditions where we create a positive feedback loop between Democrats delivering on popular and populist and progressive policy proposals for people, wow, that's a lot of P's. But if we want to create a positive feedback loop where Democrats do more of that, we also have to do the storytelling work of celebrating the good things, making sure people know about them. Voters will only reward Democrats in 22 if they deliver for them when they had a trifecta, when they had unified control of government, right? And so part of like getting that wheel turning in a way that delivers more progressive wins, sets Democrats up for progressive electoral gains in 22, involves like celebrating the good stuff that we did win so that we can win more. It doesn't mean celebrating hollowed out trash. Like, that's not our job. That's not what we should be about. But when there are genuinely good progressive wins, like the expansion of the child tax credit, right? Like, we should be talking about that.
Are you feeling confident that Biden is going to do that storytelling work? There's reporting this week that Biden's not necessarily going to put his name on the checks, on the stimulus checks, in the same way that Trump did.
I think their plan is to celebrate it, though. I think I saw that they're going to plan on going on a victory tour of sorts. The checks thing, I saw that. They didn't give a reasoning that I saw, but I'm assuming, and this is my assumption, that it's because Trump actually delayed the checks getting out to get his name on there. And I'm assuming they're not trying to delay it, so they're not going to, do the vanity project on that one. That's my assumption.
Man, I hope you're right about that.
This is my
Why?
This
Why,
is my good read, my kind read about the
Why
checks.
do you hope she's right about
This
that?
is so weird. We've switched places. I'm the one who's like having a more grim take. No, but I hope you're right. I'm much more worried, right? Like I think Biden, with his history, has a little bit of like a technocratic lean. The siren song of bipartisanship is real with him. And so I think there's one pathway where Biden signs the check, like puts his name on that so that as people are receiving it, they know exactly who it came from, and where we relentlessly talk about the fact that only Democrats voted for this bill. Not a single Republican was available to offer a yes vote on final passage. Not a single one of them. So none of this unemployment insurance, none of these direct checks, none of this amped up vaccine distribution, none of this child tax credit, none of this can you credit Republicans for. This is only because of the actions of the Democratic Party. And there's a version of this where we tell that story relentlessly until it seeps into the like political consciousness of the American people. And then there's a version of it where Democrats are so scared of the fact that they acted in a partisan manner that they try to paper it over and almost pretend that this was bipartisan because they're scared of being called out for being partisan, and confuse voters about who it is that they really have to thank for this relief that they received. I think that pull for Democrats is strong. I think part of our work is to help pull them in the other direction of actually like celebrating what Democrats were able to deliver rather than trying to pretend that Republicans helped out.
That is my worry as well. And I
Wow, I guess I'm going to be the optimist. Wild.
Stop it.
All right.
This was a bill done through budget reconciliation. So a lot of the bill is just the money cannon. We're going to take these line items in the budget, like the child tax credit, and we're going to juice them. We're just going to do as much as possible with money. We're giving money to Native communities, to farmers, to childcare providers, unemployment benefits. But the child tax credit is still a tax credit that was designed in 1997. It's not a universal social program like Social Security, where people are like, I get this check, we all know about this. The child tax credit is administered by the IRS. It's a temporary expansion.
I can jump in because I think you're not giving the child tax credit enough credit. Let's just like back up for a quick second.
Yeah.
This whole thing moved through reconciliation. And look, I think we're all clear that the Senate needs to abolish the filibuster and actually just pass legislation through regular order on 50 votes. Dear God, please. As we're ramping up to that, they moved this through reconciliation, and reconciliation is a tool of austerity. That legislative pathway was created to force cuts in government spending. And so what progressives are trying to do right now is hijack a process that was created for austerity for government investment. The procedural mechanisms are set up to force constrained government spending. Like, that's what this process was created for. And so the fact that progressives are trying to grab a hold of a process that was created for austerity and use it for government investment means that some creative stuff is happening. So, like, I hear you that this is framed as a tax credit and not necessarily framed from the jump as a social program. But I think actually Democrats deserve credit for figuring out how to, like, hijack this process intended for a different outcome and use it to, again, as you said, create a universal program that's going to get support to families. And I hear the pessimism about it being a one-year program, but also, like, this is how you build support for new programs. 1 year is kind of short. We got our work cut out for us. But you create a program, you build a constituency for it, and you make it hard to take away. Like, that is the play. Is it going to be hard to run? Yeah, probably real hard. But is it like a good intervention?
This was hard too. It was hard to do this.
And it's monthly. Yeah. I can't stress how important that part is.
Man, I feel like I really agree with that. There's still this distinction I want to make, which is what I think is amazing about what happened with the child tax credit is actually exactly what you're saying with reconciliation. The child tax credit is a policy of Reagan-Clinton neoliberalism. It's created in 1997 after Clinton's welfare reform, after Clinton is out here at the State of the Union saying,
"The era of big government is over. For too long, our welfare system has undermined the values of family and work, instead of supporting them. The Congress and I are near agreement on sweeping welfare reform. We agree on time limits, tough work requirements."
And the child tax credit is designed so that the poorest mothers do not get the benefits, in part because it happens through the tax code. So if you file no federal income taxes, you don't even show up as a person who can get then a tax benefit. And then the neoliberals, because they believe that everyone should be coerced into the market and the market is the best, and if there is any welfare, it should just be a tool to beat people into the market, they have this phase-in where the more money you make when you're poor, the more of the benefit you get. But if you make no money, you get no benefit. And as you're saying, Mary, like, I think it is a real shift to see these same people say, actually, the child tax credit to show to everyone, we are not having work requirements on this. It's gonna come monthly. We should not be using child poverty as a stick to force people into the market. I think there are some people who frame this as like, this is the biggest expansion of the welfare state since the Great Society. And I think that's maybe where I draw the line, where I'm like, this is still, like with reconciliation, taking something that was designed for a different purpose and pushing it as far as possible in a progressive direction. And I want to give people credit on that. To me, like, the horizons are obviously making the child tax credit permanent and ultimately creating universal social programs that end all childhood poverty. But this, I think you're right, is the positive feedback loop that gets us there.
I'm with Amira on thinking the fact that it's monthly payments is hugely important and is actually like a little bit of the dividing point for me and how I would take this, because it's making this more like the survival checks, more like the direct cash assistance, which I also think have been helpfully destigmatized through the pandemic. And so it's using the procedural mechanism of a tax credit to do something that looks like checks. Which is why I'm leaning a little bit more towards giving folks credit for finding creative procedural pathways to move this forward. I think if we were talking about like an annual tax credit on the back end, I would feel very differently.
The fact that we are at a place where they're like, we give people money directly.
Yeah.
That's fucking big. It's a lot harder to take away something once people are used to it. This long saga of UI from where it was in the summer and the lapses in between all of these programs, people in DC are very uncomfortable. It is hard work to get them to give things directly to people. And a package that has so many things that is direct aid to people is a big deal.
The Tax Policy Center just put out an analysis of which income groups are going to benefit, and Their projection is that the poorest 20% of Americans will see a 20% boost in their income from all, between the stimulus checks, the child tax credit, unemployment benefits. The richest 1% will receive an income boost of 0%. So very different than the Trump tax cuts in terms of the distributional impact.
Very different from CARES,
And
too.
very different from CARES.
The CARES package.
All right, we're going to take a break, and then when we come back, Bloc Party, the politics, the blocs in Congress, and how we got here.
Love it.
Amira and Mira, see you there. Hello, we're back. I'm Guido. This is Bloc Party. This is group chat in the DMs this afternoon. Amira, political director at JD, and Mary Small, national legislative director at Indivisible.
I have an Indivisible story.
Yes?
So I used to have to answer calls when I worked in the Senate, my first job, and there would be a ton of people calling.
At the top levels of Democratic Senate leadership.
There would be a ton of people calling. But one of the great things, and I would always realize, know which script they were reading. But after a while, there was one woman who would always call, and I remember her because she was from the same city that I'm from, and she would always call, and at first it was just the script, and it was just really about the Republican agenda, but then she would, because she was doing it and she was so engaged, she started being like, so what's the senator doing? I started looking into this Democrat, and honestly, I don't think I'm very happy here either. And I was yes.
I love
come
it
to
so
us.
much, Amira. Okay,
So,
now I will just quickly tell you the moment where I realized that this was actually kind of a fun superpower was in the appropriations, federal funding fight a couple of years ago. I was brand new at Indivisible. I had been there less than a month. And we were doing this whole push around the fact that the Trump administration was trying to give billions more dollars to ICE and CBP. And Indivisible, part of what I love about them is that they're a little wonky. They like to get into the policy weeds and policy details. And so we were doing education with our groups about the appropriations process, about how federal funding works, about how you can jam in extra money at the last minute through anomalies and all of this stuff. And so we were driving calls one day, and I happened to be up on the Hill back in the days where we actually were in person ever. And I walked past, I walked into a Senate office, and the person answering the phones at the front desk was like, "Are you the one doing this?" Why are people calling me and talking about anomalies? I don't know what anomalies are.
Wow.
It was
And
a
you're
fun day.
look, this is just an important politicization process. First, they're talking about anomalies. Then they start to look into what Democrats are doing, and then suddenly they become progressive agitators
Yes. That's
right.
calling into
That's right.
the
That is the
office.
path.
This is the
enlightened
pathway.
path for all of us.
Yes.
And then Mary and Amira have to pick up the ball. The constituent pressure is coming in, but then there's a question, which is the left, are progressives in Congress, going to be able to organize, actually on Capitol Hill, to leverage that public pressure to win anything? And there were some specific wins that progressives were able to win. Obviously not everything. We didn't win on the minimum wage. But Mary and Amira, I know you've been really in the trenches of the progressive left in DC, working to make sure that there's a bloc, per se, that, as you said, Mary, can act as a backstop against some conservative Democrats and the GOP trying to cut down the bill. And from talking with you, it sounds like part of what's made this possible is actually reforms to the Congressional Progressive Caucus itself that have changed how that caucus is working. That caucus includes close to 100 members of the House Democratic Caucus, but wasn't necessarily a power player in the Obama era, if I'm going to be honest, right? There aren't a ton of...
Ooh, shots fired.
I don't... You don't have to say anything, but I'm just going to say, in the Obama era, it was a loose caucus. It produced some policy, but it wasn't necessarily able to flex together in negotiations. So what has changed at the Congressional Progressive Caucus?
I'm not here to get spicy about the past CPC, but I will say so they went through this formal process of changing their internal rules. And the long and short of it is that they basically made it easier for themselves to negotiate and then vote as a bloc. The basic idea behind it is that if progressives are willing to cohere as a bloc and prioritize the same set of things and negotiate collectively, and then when necessary, vote collectively, they can force pretty significant concessions to progressives. And I think, when the progressives were like reorganizing themselves over the course of October and November, there were a lot of comparisons that popped up to the Freedom Caucus, which is a voting bloc on the far right that has long exercised power.
That was kind of like the Tea Party bloc in the Obama era.
Yes.
It was seen as the Congressional Tea Party voting bloc.
That's right. Like far-right extremist, but did and have consistently like negotiated and voted as a bloc. And I think that when this first happened, some folks were wrongly comparing the progressive voting bloc to like the Tea Party of the left. And I think what's really smart about the distinctions that they're making is that basically the Freedom Caucus was only ever used to kill things, to stop them, to prevent them from moving forward. But the work of progressives isn't just, sometimes there will be bad compromises, there will be bad bills that they will need to block in that way to actually stop from moving forward. But most of what progressives are trying to do in this moment is actually win things for people, right? Like actually lock in legislative wins that deliver for the American people. And that requires a different theory of change and a different way of wielding the block. And so even though the margin in the House is really small, like Democrats barely control the majority, so I think a lot of folks are thinking like, oh, great, you only need like 5 or 6 people to come together to create a block in order to jam up things in the House. And that's true if what you want to do is paralyze the system. If what you want is gridlock, maybe it's true that you only need 5 or 6 people.
Because then you could just stop it, and then you could hope that Pelosi's not going to find any compromises across the aisle. And then there's just not a majority to pass.
Right. And then you're tempting the worst side effect of a block, which is vote shopping on the other side.
Right.
And so if all you need to do is replace 5 or 6 votes, you might be able to find those on the Republican side of the aisle. But if you're the Congressional Progressive Caucus and you're a bloc voting with a much larger group of people, one, like that's a much more powerful bloc that you're able to do, and you're basically able to prevent counter-organizing. Because while it might be possible to find 5 or 6 Republicans if you make harmful policy concessions to bring them on board, it's going to be nearly impossible to find 40, 50, 60.
What were the rules reforms that changed the caucus's ability to flex this muscle? What's the relationship between the reforms the caucus makes and its ability to negotiate and wield its power in this way?
Before codifying this, the caucus did not have the mechanisms to do these things.
Internally
For itself. It hampered the ability to send, whip, right? To get everybody to send a whip notice and say, hey, we're trying to get these we have to, figure out our priorities. We need a list of 4 or 5 things. What are we going to do?
Yeah, and the other piece of it was this requirement that CPC members vote in alignment with CPC positions at least 2/3 of the time, or they can be expelled from the caucus, which is huge for actually trying to create this cohered sense of unity. There's an enforcement mechanism if needed, but it's really a mind change in the way that the caucus members related to each other, where they had sort of a very, very loose ideological alignment, but no expectation that they would move as a group.
If you're just voting against us half the time or more than half the time, you're just not going to be in the caucus, and that's okay. And if that's a problem for you, then you can change the way you vote. And you're saying that enforcement mechanism makes organizing, makes whipping votes just more possible. It makes that mean something.
I think a lot of times folks are looking for that sexy, high conflict, super public moment where progressives are throwing down a card that says no.
That's what I'm looking for. I'm when is the sit-in, guys?
Yeah. and I just want to be honest about the fact that if a block is working the way that you want it to, you actually almost never get there. You will sometimes, and you'll have to be prepared to press go on the strategy. But if your threat is real and credible, if it's substantiated with leadership, you get what you want long before you get to the point of a showdown on the House floor. And so that's what we saw happen here.
It's much more similar to a parliamentary coalition in another country where the liberals and the left party have said, we are the majority coalition. And usually at the beginning of the legislative session and the government, you guys are going to strike a deal at a table if, as you're saying, the bloc really has that power to wield.
Yeah, but any good organizer, any good activist will tell you that in any campaign, you need to have an arc of escalation, right? You don't jump from nothing to an arrestable action, right? Like that's not good campaigning. What you want to do is have an arc that you're building where your demands are known, your target understands what they are, your target has a chance to say yes, and then you escalate as needed until you win. And that's actually no different inside of Congress, right? So like the arc of escalation for members of Congress, like you don't want folks to just jump from nothing to their most dramatic action, because that's when you end up with like performative plays that don't actually lock in legislative wins. So what we're trying to do is build a smart arc of escalation that locks in things along the way. Okay, now I really will answer your question. So
Now we get to hear about real smart arcs of escalation that don't even have to escalate to the highest point sometimes.
that's like one of my pet peeves is this like idea that like organizing and what happens in DC are different, because they're not actually. Smart advocacy work in DC is just organizing. It's organizing with a different set of people. Rather than activists on the street, you're organizing with members of Congress, but it's like still just organizing.
It's all politics. It's all politics and organizing.
But I want people to understand that a lot of the institution is not, like the incentives inside this institution are against all of these things. The incentive is for you to run your own fiefdom.
You're right.
And
okay,
to
you're right.
collect all of your own glory. And so it's really hard in general, just from the inside, for members of Congress to think like organizers or to want to use the tools of organizers. So this is why this is a new project and a learning curve.
Amira's right. That's a good take.
Because most politicians are narcissists, but sometimes they can work as a bloc. So what were the wins from this round, now that the caucus has these powers? What happened?
So in this particular fight, I think that the first moment that progressives were really successful is just like deciding that they were going to do it, that they were going to coordinate and have collective strategy on this.
Especially in the House.
Especially in the House, yeah, right.
All in the CPC.
Yep, the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House was really, because this bill started out in the House, and that's where we have the progressive voting bloc mechanism. And so they ran through the whole process that is part of their like new reforms to their way of operating. They had a meeting, they talked through what their priorities were, they sent out a whip where they got everyone to vote on what their top priorities were and ended up coalescing around a subset of priorities. And that's huge, because what we've seen happen so often in the past is that every member is working on their own priority issue, all of which are good and progressive priorities, but has the effect of fracturing their power rather than consolidating.
And then there's like
it.
20 little progressive policies from 20 House offices, and there are not like 3 top-line demands from 30 offices.
Right,
from
exactly.
30
And so
members.
like here, they decided like, oh, you know what, we're actually all gonna fight together on protecting the survival checks, on like preventing the amount from being lowered, on preventing them from being further means tested so that they would go to fewer people. We're all gonna fight together on making sure that the increase in the minimum wage, the Raise the Wage Act, is included in this package. Like they all decided they were gonna fight together on these things. And those first 2 things were the first 2 wins that they got. There was this attempt as the bill was moving through the House to means test the checks to say that fewer working class people would get access to them. And that was really being driven by the Senate side. The Senate was saying, excuse us, House, can you pre-compromise your bill to make it easier for us? Can you please bow to our demands even though we're not part of the House?
Was that just from the GOP, or you also saw...
No, that was from Democrats in the Senate.
Right.
And like, I think one of the things that we know is that, excuse me to all your Senate friends, but the Senate is largely where things go to get worse in this landscape, right? Like there is a 50-50 split. It could not be a more bare majority. And so the House should not be making any pre-compromises to the Senate whatsoever. Right? Because then the Senate is going to, like, if the Senate wants to strip stuff out, if the Senate is going to water stuff down, force them to do it. Don't do that for them on the House side. And so the Senate wanted to water down the checks. Democrats in the House were like a little bit trying to figure out what to do. And progressives went to leadership. They went to the committee chair and were like, you can't do it. We won't vote for the package if you do it. You got to keep these strong. The same thing happened with the minimum wage. You know, we knew that there was a chance that the parliamentarian in the Senate was going to say that the minimum wage increase was, quote, outside the rules of this reconciliation process that they were using. And so there was some concern that the House was going to strip the minimum wage provision out of their own package, again, to sort of like pre-concede to the needs of the Senate. And progressives, again, not only in that moment, but had actually been laying groundwork for weeks to say, the House has to pass the strongest package it possibly can. It has to include minimum wage. This is how you earn progressive support. We have a huge block of people whose support you need to get this across the floor. And despite the fact that, the parliamentarian came out days before the bill passed the House and said, this is outside the rules of she doesn't actually talk like that, right? But this is outside of the rules of
this is how we receive it.
Progressives were successful in making sure it stayed in the House bill. And so I think given the dynamic and posturing of senators who need to make their mark on, it's also not how they talk, but make their mark on the bill, the better we can send something over to the Senate, the less it's gonna fall. And so if you send over something that's already mid-level, it's just gonna get worse from there. If you send over something that's aiming high, it's probably going to come down a little bit, but it won't be nearly as much. And I think progressives did a really good job of executing that. And then the third win that they got, okay, so again, if you're counting at home, they kept checks from being means tested and going to fewer people. They kept minimum wage in the House bill and made it a really elevated and nasty fight and helped put pressure on the Senate for how we're expecting them to deliver in the future. So that's 1 and 2. And then the third is that when it went over to the Senate, there was a big kerfuffle, you might say, over a change to the unemployment insurance expansion.
This was a last-minute kerfuffle.
Well, it was a longer kerfuffle because they were basically negotiating for a while between the White House and the Senate about it, and then they had reached an agreement that it was going to be 300 instead of 400, but it was going to be through September instead of just through August, which was what was in the House package. So that was basically pre-negotiated before they got to the vote-a-rama.
Pre-negotiated between the White House and Democrats in the Senate.
Right. And then the House was like, well, this is acceptable because it was longer and the not taxing the
Yes,
the
if you got
$10,000
unemployment
of,
benefits last year, it will not be taxed this year.
Right. So those were this was pre-negotiated before vote-a-rama. But then during this process of vote-a-rama, Manchin then put a pause on all of the voting and everything because he had to be negotiated with, because he wanted to go with a Republican amendment, Rob Portman's amendment.
This last minute thing where Manchin was like, I'm actually not on board for the deal that has been carefully negotiated over the course of days, and maybe I'm going to be successfully counter-organized by this Republican amendment. And then they paused voting until they could get that sorted out. And that was double-digit number of hours of pause while they were negotiating. And the everything Amira said is exactly right, except I'll offer one friendly amendment, which is that when the House and the Senate and the White House were negotiating this change to unemployment, progressives, I think, were really smartly we don't like that. We don't like that you're watering down unemployment. And they never said that's fine. We're cool with that. Right, because that was an important part of their strategy for later. They were always like, we're not signing off on that. We have some red lines that you're getting awfully close to, and maybe you're crossing. And so then, as that 12-hour negotiation with Manchin was happening, progressives were able to be a pretty clear backstop, where they were like, we can tell you that if it gets worse than this negotiated deal, you lose us. You lose us if it gets worse than this. We are the backstop for how bad this change can be. And rather than having the House turn around and immediately pass the Senate version, which is what has ended up happening, if y'all water this down further, we're going to force this into a conference committee, which is an additional step where the House version and the Senate version have to be directly negotiated with each other, rather than just having the House sign off on the Senate version. So they had a smart plan B in their back pocket that was a really successful red line that I think helped hold everything together so that the final package was this extended timeline and the tax-free piece that Amira was talking about.
I blocked a lot of this out. I was like, it's 2 hours. I'm like, it saved a lot of time off my life. That's all I remember. It was a haze of a lot of stuff happening all at once.
It's totally right. Doing this work in D.C., much like being an organizer outside of D.C., involves some strategic amnesia, right? Just letting go of the memories that don't serve as you continue to build.
Man, that is tough. One day we'll do an episode about how to survive DC, and we'll have you both back. But it wasn't just the squad. You also had progressives like Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman, who is a black woman who represents New Jersey's 12th congressional district. She is progressive. She's not a part of the squad, but she would just She was tweeting that week as news was coming out about what the Senate wanted to cut down, where news is coming out about the means testing of the stimulus checks. And Representative Coleman tweets, "This is madness." And then there is news coming out about the changes to UI. And she tweets on March 5th, "This trend is outrageous. Eliminating $15 an hour minimum wage. Cuts to the weekly payments of unemployment. What are we doing here? I'm frankly disgusted with some of my colleagues and question whether I can support this bill." That's the backstop you're talking about. And it's not just the squad or 7 of the most left members, it's the Bonnie Watson Colemans as well saying, "I do not know whether this is gonna work. What are you doing over there in that other chamber?"
Yeah, that's right. And I think part of why that's so powerful is because it's giving signals about how big your block is, that you're risking losing, right? And this gets back to what we were talking about before of how risky it is in this environment to try to block something with 6 or 7, how much more powerful it is to try to block something with a block that's big enough to include her as well, right? And I think that kind of outside anger that's really visible to folks helps make helps make the back channeling that was happening between the Senate and the House more credible, right? Like when the CPC is reaching out to Schumer and saying, "Look, we got to tell you, you're really close to losing a huge chunk of us House side. You can't give anything else. You'll lose us." It's so much more credible when there's like public pieces of that are spilling out that bolster that threat. On the flip side, right? I think like part of what was happening there was a calculation of like the size of your block has to match the size of your demand. But there was a lot of left Twitter anger that was like, the squad should block this bill and force minimum wage to be put back in. And that's the point at which like the strategy and the magical thinking kind of pieces get disconnected, because the reality is that reinserting minimum wage into that bill could not have been a huger demand, which meant that if you were going to pull it off, the size of the block you needed to do that also had to be absolutely enormous, right? And so this idea that you can match a tiny block with an enormous demand is where the block strategy like can't get it across the finish line. But if you're scaling the size of your block to the size of your demand, that's where you can actually win additional pieces to deliver for people.
In this last minute kerfuffle, when either Manchin has to back down and accept what's going on, or House progressives have to back down on whether or not unemployment is going to be only $300 through July, and whether it's going to be taxed or not if you receive benefits next year. And Manchin is the one that backs down in this situation. And that's because you're saying there's a block that's big enough to really credibly threaten. And I think the implication of what you're saying is that the block that was really willing to go that far on the minimum wage and their sense of whether or not they could get Manchin and other Democrats to really back down on the minimum wage was different and just was not there yet for that demand. That's what you would say to folks who say, why couldn't we do this on the minimum wage if we did it on checks and on UI?
So look what happened on the minimum wage vote in the Senate. We lost 8 Democrats on that vote in the Senate. We lost 8 Democrats who were unwilling to vote for Senator Sanders' amendment on the minimum wage. So the size of the demand that you're trying to overcome is, we have 8 Democrats on the Senate side that we would have to get to change their mind, never mind keeping the whole House caucus together. And so the block that was formed by like the CPC, the CPC, Bonnie Watson Coleman is out there talking about that, is not big enough to overcome we lost 8 Democrats in the Senate problem. We found out in this fight that it was large enough to overcome getting Manchin to agree to the deal, right? And so that's when I'm talking about like matching the size of your block to the size of your demand. Getting Manchin to fold is a relatively smaller demand than getting 8 Democrats to flip.
I do want to talk through just what it meant for $15 to be in the bill, what the different like strategies were, what would have happened if the parliamentarian, big picture was if the parliamentarian had ruled that it could stay in the bill, then you would not have had 8 Democrats vote against it. Because ultimately they would not vote against this entire package. And there might have been, I mean, if we want to be very real, which we've been very real this podcast, Mary's just bringing the realness. She's like, okay, you might have had some negotiations around it. I don't know if it would have been $15 the way it was put in, but it would have definitely included minimum wage because nobody would have voted against it. So that was the best case scenario universe. That obviously did not happen. And then the other option was what people were asking for was that the Senate and the White House would go around the parliamentarian. That was the pressure point for a lot of like House members, and it was pretty clear that the White House like dug in and was like, we're not doing this. This is not happening. Nah.
There was not really a moment where you ever thought that Vice President Harris was going to do that, because the optics of that, the White House was just like, we're not going to do that on COVID relief. We're not going to overrule the parliamentarian.
Yeah, and if we're talking about norm shifting for somebody like President Biden, this would have been a bigger break from the Senate than probably all the filibuster reform conversations we're having. It would have been a big deal to people in DC. So what we're asking to regular people, you're like, okay, this person, you weren't even elected. Who are you, parliamentarian? What and it totally makes sense. Like, I'm with you. Here in the Senate and in DC, you were asking for something more shocking than getting rid of the filibuster.
And I feel like this just brings up a question of strategy where on the merits, yeah, we don't want an unelected parliamentarian to decide what's going on. But the bigger picture here is that, as Mary said in the very beginning, this whole process is done through budget reconciliation. And it's done through budget reconciliation because it's trying to get something done quick and take this tool of austerity, which constrains what the government can do, and use it to provide immediate relief. And I think just part of the takeaway that I hear is we would like there to be a situation where we could overrule the parliamentarian and take that as far as it could go. That is not in our control. It's in Vice President Kamala Harris's control and the White House's control, and they seemed really immovable on that. Reconciliation is just not the best vehicle to necessarily have that fight in, because then we have to get into a wonky fight about parliamentary rules, which is not really what we want to do as the left or even as Democrats. As we were talking about in terms of messaging at the beginning, we would just like to have bills that raise the minimum wage, that are clear and simple, that we can vote on, and that the fight is over the substance. And picking the fight over the parliamentarian when we know it's a demand that they're much less likely to move on. I think what I hear is that was part of why that was so difficult. Both the demand being so out of reach and the demand being tied to a process that is not necessarily suited to those kind of policies, which is why the parliamentarian is taking it out.
Right, and that's why we're all running to abolish the filibuster.
What leads us to the next
Ultimately, we're like, we don't need to, this world we've put ourselves in, we don't need to be in this world. We can be in a better world. We don't even need to know what a parliament, like, all of this is our own creation, and we should step out of it. So that happened. The third pressure point came when it was like, okay, well, that's not going to happen, but the 6 votes in the House, presumably the squad, should say that they will vote against this entire bill to get minimum wage back in there. And that was, for all of the reasons Mary listed, not going to happen. You could have a very credible threat, but what that would mean then is they would absolutely shop for those other 6 votes and ultimately probably make this bill worse, which is not what progressives would want.
I think that's exactly right. I think back to some of the conversations that, questions that we were getting from reporters from other organizations in early January, right after the Georgia runoffs. And the framed, and Indivisible got a lot of these, right? Because we were like a resistance organization. And folks were like, what are you going to do in this new moment? And the way that the question was framed was in this false binary, where your choices for how you could operate in a Democratic trifecta are to be like the wind behind the sails of the Democratic establishment, where you're just doing whatever Biden and Pelosi and Schumer are asking to do because wins beget wins. And so no matter what it is, it's like the vote blue no matter who thought, right? That whatever it is that they're doing, you have to support them because that's how we get more wins. And there's that option available to you. And that's real serious governing option. And then the other option available to you is to be the left flank, to be the progressives, to be the radicals who are holding out the vision for the solutions that communities really deserve. and is like outraged all the time, like not participating in the negotiation, sort of like yelling from the outside. And I think that what the CPC and the groups that are trying to work with the CPC in this coordinated way are trying to do is create a third option for how you operate in this landscape, which is this idea of like a progressive voting bloc that, has some guardrails on it. Like you have to use it with restraint, but if used well and tactically and strategically can actually lock in wins. And so like you don't want to like pull the trigger on the voting bloc to tank a bill if you don't have a viable pathway to win the thing that you're trying to win. There are moments where you show restraint because it proves that your threat is credible and it helps you win the next thing down the line, so that you're not like the boy crying wolf or whatever. That like playing the long game for this legislative session involves operating with restraint. You sit on the edge of the windowsill of the Overton window to lock in what you can, but don't execute the play if it's fully outside the realm of what's possible, because that weakens the credibility of your threat for the next time. I think that that's like ultimately what happened in the like final hours of this particular legislative fight.
Yeah, and what we're not able to cover the entire history of is just all of the moving of the Overton window on things like the child tax credit and unemployment insurance. I mean, decades of work chipping away at the neoliberal policy consensus of the Reagan-Clinton era that gave us these instincts to exclude the poorest mothers or to phase it out. Well, this is not the last time we're going to talk about left strategy. Mary, thank you so much for joining us on Bloc Party.
Yeah, thank you. This was fun.
This was fun. Amira, just another day in DC for you, another group chat. All right, that's the show. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Amira.
Thanks, y'all. Talk soon.
Bye, Amira.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Our producer is Becca Rose. Our mix engineer is Leslie Gaston-Bird. Special thanks, as always, to Amy Westervelt and Michael Catano. See you on the block.